Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Marketing Ops Confessions. I'm Laura Aber. I'm the Demand Gen Manager here at Mad Kudu, and I am joined by the amazing Dr. Debbie Qaqish. She's the Principal and Chief Strategy Officer at the Pedowitz Group. She's a strategic marketing ops advocate. She's a revenue marketing pioneer, strategist, and speaker and writer. She's come with many insights today. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Debbie, and welcome.
Laura, pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And I'd love to start out if you can give us an overview of what it is that the Pedowitz Group does and what you do specifically as their Chief Strategy Officer.
Okay, well, I always tell people I have the best job in the world. Number one, I'm very passionate about what I do. And number two, my job really is to go out into the market and talk to all these wonderful, innovative, creative marketing organizations to find out what they're doing. And a lot of times when we work with organizations, it's kind of in a couple of different areas. Number one, either marketing needs to transform the role of marketing in their organization from being a pens and mugs department to being an actual revenue driver, and or we have a larger revenue transformation happening, which typically involves marketing, sales, and also the customer success teams. So we've been very fortunate to work with some of the best brands and some of the best companies in the business. We started in 2007, and we haven't looked back since.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of change and transformation from 2007 to today. And I know that's one of the things we're going to talk about is how we're taking marketing and marketing ops and this revenue side of things and building it up to have the strategy and develop revenue through the operations role and organization. And I love that you brought up that you're passionate, because I see that about you as a voice for marketing and leaderships and marketing operations and revenue operations. And there's this, what we're seeing is like a revolution of marketing operations and being more strategic, and what you're seeing, and you've mentioned to me, as this evolution of the operations space. And I'd love to start there. What are you seeing, or what has really started this evolution of the marketing operations role specifically?
That's a great question, Laura. And let me begin with a little bit of history. I bought my first marketing automation system in 2007 when I was CMO of a fast growth technology company in Atlanta, Georgia. I bought Eloqua. It was the only game in town. And I didn't know until many years later that I was customer 12 at Eloqua, wow. Right? All I knew was that when I saw that technology, I knew it would change forever the role of marketing as it related to revenue. And prior to that, most of my career had been in sales. So I come with a very sales savvy. And I think back in those days, if you had like 5 different pieces of technology and marketing, you were woo-woo. You were pretty hot stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we know through Scott Brinker's work with Chief Martech and the Martech conferences that there's, 8,000-9,000 different pieces of technology now. And it's been interesting to see that history of how technology has fully enabled marketing in brand new ways, but quite often marketing kind of misses the mark on delivering on that promise. And I think in the early days, as we began to intake and use this technology, it was a little bit more of a pretty shiny toy syndrome, Laura. And I think where we've come, especially, and it's the role of marketing operations, is to take marketing from being just that creative, pens and mugs kind of department to actually, how do you use this technology to make a business impact? And when I talk about a strategic marketing operations organization, that's what I'm talking about. A strategic marketing operations organization fully allows marketing to deliver on that promise of being a revenue driver. And without that, marketing will always be a pens and mugs department. With it, they become a revenue driver.
Right. And you mentioned that you had purchased a tool, in this case, Eloqua, when you were a CMO. And so now we're starting to see maybe this divide between marketing leadership and CMOs in these operations roles. And so I'm curious, in your position and your experience as a marketing leader yourself, what have you seen from now? There's these operations specific roles who are maybe owning the tech stack or making purchases, CMOs who maybe still get that shiny tool syndrome and maybe don't fully understand the strategic impact that this tech brings, and those who are owning these roles.
Interesting question. And I kind of see three CMOs. I see the CMO who's blithely unaware. And these are mostly CMOs who come into organizations as really being the brand kind of person, more of a traditional CMO role. It's not that that role is not useful. It is, but it's no longer all that a CMO can be. Right. And then I see these CMOs who pretend like they understand technology, and those are the ones that get a little bit more of a pretty shiny toy syndrome. And then we see CMOs who are actually using technology to be able to drive revenue and to make an impact on the business. So those are the three kinds of CMOs that I see. And it's so interesting to me, Laura, that as we sit here in 2022, CMOs are still across those three spectrums. Right. Yet at a board level, the majority of organizations are now telling marketers, hey, you got to help us drive revenue. You know, we're in a new world where the customer's in control, and it's ever increasingly digital, right? So marketing, you have to step up and help us. You got to become part of the revenue team. And the enabler for that is that marketing operations organization. And one of the things that I talk about in my book, From Backroom to Boardroom, which is all about the rise of strategic marketing operations, is the marketing operations leader, right? Yeah. And how they can't only be a tech geek or a button pusher. They have to be strategically thinking about, I've got all the power of this technology. How can I use it? How can I inform the business that we can have a better business model or drive more revenue or get more satisfied customers, right? Because there's so much power in that technology. And that is what a strategic marketing operations organization does with a strategic marketing operations leader. They use the power of that technology to make a difference in the business.
Yeah. There's so many things that I love in your book, and I love how you talk about being a strategic marketing operations leader and what that looks like for an organization and a CMO or a marketing leader to understand. So you have the perspective of the individual to step up that way, but the organization to support that. And one thing that I'm really curious of from your perspective is we hear marketing ops professionals, those who are just starting out, those who are leaders, that they feel stuck in this button pusher, very tactical. And so the marketing operations professionals are speaking up and they're offering suggestions and playbooks and whatnot. But whose responsibility is it really to make sure that the marketing operations role and function is being elevated to this?
It's the CMO. It's the CMO. And I can go into any organization. I can have one conversation with the CMO and I can tell you if they're being successful or not. Because if you don't have a CMO, and a CMO doesn't have to be a nerd. They don't have to be a tech geek, right? They just have to give their head of marketing operations, they have to make them a partner, right? That's what they have to do. The CMO has to be in partnership with the head of marketing operations to really use that technology. And so I want to share a story with you about, you use the term button pusher. And the whole idea behind my book, From Backroom to Boardroom, Begin Your Journey with Strategic Marketing Operations, was I was actually doing a conference, a MarTech conference. It was in the one they do in California on the West Coast. And I was talking to a room full of marketing operations professionals, and I used the term button pushers. And I said, how many people work in an organization where your role as a marketing ops professional is viewed more as a button pusher? And way too many hands went up. And when I used the term button pusher with that group, I got a visceral response from that, right? It's like I reached into their chest and ripped out their hearts, right? Because we are not button pushers. We can do so much more. So there was this extraordinarily pent up desire and frustration that they could be doing so much more to impact the business. And that really was the beginning of the book. That's kind of how it all started. And yet I will say that still too many marketing ops organizations are still frustrated. And that is just a crisis of leadership. You know, we all know that the CMO role has 50% less tenure than any other executive in the organization. It's a very difficult role. It has so many different challenges to it. And I don't think today's CMO can be successful or hold on to their jobs, right? And progress if they don't have that head of strategic marketing operations as their wing person. It really is a 1-2 punch in an organization these days.
Yeah, and I forget who it is, but there's a quote in your book where I think it's a CMO or maybe a sales and marketing leader, and they mention that they really view the marketing ops professional, their leader, as their enabler. Their success is because of their marketing operations function.
That's it. That is exactly right. And I've seen CMOs be let go, right? Because they were not able to bring that to the party. And so it really is a challenging position for the CMO. And again, their wing person has to be the head of strategic marketing operations.
Yeah. And so I have an interesting question for you. I hear a lot that the next CMOs are marketing operations professionals, but I'm curious, is that where the path of marketing operations should be? Should it be bigger? Is it a different title? Should it always be the CMO and this operations person together? Or is that where you see the operations role going?
It is interesting. We are seeing more leaders of marketing operations become CMOs, right? But again, it depends on what the organization asks of a CMO. Right. I think that's part of the reason they have so much turnover, because quite often companies, they may think they want one thing out of a CMO, and then things change and they want something else from a CMO. And you're going to have the rare CMO who can do it all successfully, right? But I do see this just happened with a client that I'm working with. The head of marketing ops became the CMO of the organization because that was exactly what that company needed at this point in time. So we are seeing marketing ops into the corner office CMO. And we're also seeing the successful CMOs who understand marketing ops and technology going into the CEO slot, right? Okay. And for a long time, that the number of CMOs becoming CEO was very low, and we're starting to see that to rise as well. Because again, having that technology vision and acumen to understand how best to optimize that technology, to change the business, to improve the business, to stay more competitive in the business, is really what it takes to survive as an organization today. So yes, we are seeing those people going from marketing ops to CMO and CMO to CEO.
Yeah. And speaking, you mentioned that, everyone has somewhere to grow. Not everyone's going to have every box checked. And of course, that's where you get your support and whatnot. But in your book, you do list some skills, but you have this chart about behaviors, and you talk about this person being a digital visionary, data insights and obsessed, a process engineer, change agent, skill builder, and functional facilitator. And I love that. And of course, again, like everyone's going to have strengths and weaknesses, but I'm curious, where do you see those who are rising to this leadership level? Where are you seeing the most, and like what behaviors they have, and where is there really a gap in these behaviors?
That's a great question. And I would say it's their ability to collaborate across functions. It's really interesting. Marketing has a history of trying to partner with sales. Let's just take that as an example, right? And, we're sitting here in 2022 and the failures are massive, in that category. Then along comes a marketing operations professional, and they are able to knit together sales and marketing in a way that I've really never seen before. And I ask marketing operations professionals, why is it that you can create a credible relationship with sales where marketing could not? Some of it has to do with history, legacy, but quite often it has to do with the fact that they can talk about data, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can talk about the data demonstrates, the data shows, we have the data to support, rather than just, making stuff up, off the cuff. And I've also seen marketing operations kind of play the role of Switzerland almost between marketing and sales. And so sitting there in the center and being able to communicate effectively to marketing, to sales, and helping them communicate with each other is one of the things that I see as critical to a top performing marketing ops organization. Of course, optimizing the use of the technology, those things are critical, but I can't say enough about their ability to collaborate. And because they can collaborate, they can get things done cross-functionally that need to happen, but traditionally have been very difficult to drive.
Yeah, one of the behaviors that stick out to me as you're saying that, in that I've heard others say they really appreciate in their operations role, is this skill builder. Like when they're telling the story with the data, or they're providing this information, they're not just giving these numbers and these charts and dropping it off, but they're helping them understand, what does this mean? Where does that come from? And by giving this information and helping someone build their skills, that's such a natural way to be that functional facilitator and build these relationships and build that trust. Because again, it comes back to that marketing leader who said, marketing ops is makes me successful. Is that first time you help someone get that win, you're like, okay, this is my go-to person. This is my buddy that's going to help me succeed and help the organization succeed in the long
Again,
run.
There's two kinds of CMOs. There's CMOs who they'll ask their marketing operations leader, I've got to go to the board, I have to do a report, pull some stuff together for me. And then they do a terrible job of actually presenting it because they don't understand it, right? And then there's the CMO who's in lockstep with the marketing operations leader. And then that marketing operations leader can fully prepare that CMO to have a business-oriented conversation based on data. And again, I just can't say enough about that relationship.
Yeah. And you had mentioned too, and I think this will get us into the evolution continuing into revenue operations, or what you consider the next gen. And it's, you're talking about bringing in the sales and the marketing, but it's about the entire customer journey and taking that information. And so tell me what you're seeing now about this next evolution into revenue operations and this next gen.
Okay. One thing that I'll talk about in my book is I have a model for how a marketing operations organization matures, right? And the last stage, Laura, as you mentioned, is what I call next gen. And next gen is very interesting because this is where you take marketing operations and sales operations and customer success operations, and you create one organization that typically reports to the CRO or the COO, or you take marketing ops, sales ops, and customer success ops, and you don't reorganize, but you create a center of excellence so you now have that capability in-house. And we're seeing a lot of interest in the notion of RevOps today. We just released a report. I think you were going to give people access to the report that we surveyed 500 professionals, marketing, sales, and customer success to find out what was happening in this world of RevOps. And it's super interesting because the number one thing that they all say is that by creating that tighter alignment, they're able to drive more revenue. That's just it at the end of the day. Sales wins, marketing wins, customer success wins, everybody wins. Yet it requires a different way of thinking about the business. And if you think about it, Laura, we have spent years creating business models that are now no longer working for organizations. We live in a digital world. The customer's in control, right? What worked for you 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it just is not going to work in the new world that we live in. And so incredibly important in that change is how companies are responding to their customers, how they're creating optimal customer experiences, because so much of the customer experience with your company is online, right? It is through digital means. And so those companies who have figured out that formula are those who are winning in the digital economy that we have today. So this whole notion of Rev Ops, again, is very, very hot right now. The number one driver to create a Rev Ops capability and or a specific function is this need to understand the customer and to be able to respond to customer changes in almost real time. That is what's creating competitive advantages for organizations, whether you're in the insurance industry, fintech, moving, it doesn't matter what kind of industry you're in. If you're not connecting with that customer, you will not be successful in this new world that we live in.
Yeah. And I'm seeing this trend of, moving to revenue operations or having titles there. But I'm also seeing some people say that revenue operations is just another term for sales ops or for supporting sales.
And, I do think some people, they do that. Some people do that. And, and that's okay. If they want Rev Ops to be what used to be called sales ops, but they just put more focused on revenue. But we take a broader definition of it. And our broader definition includes all the customer facing functions of the organization. And then how do you create that capability or that singular unit so that the company gets one view of the customer and everybody knows what they're supposed to do with the customer, no matter what part of the company the customer is interacting with. And that you also have data and you can make almost immediate changes to what's happening because you have all this data about the customer. So we take a broader definition of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned as well that, you're seeing that these central functions are reporting maybe to a CRO or a COO. Mm-hmm. And why do you think that they're not reporting into a CMO?
Well, and CMOs don't really like this, right? A lot of CMOs I talk to, they don't want marketing operations taken away, right? Mm-hmm. And so in every organization is different. And a lot of times how you get organized depends on where the skill vacuums are, right? So if you have a CMO who's not very good about thinking about revenue and driving revenue, you could see that function pulled away from marketing and put under the CRO. Mm-hmm. I will say that most of the marketing ops or Rev Ops leaders that I talk to would actually prefer to, it's about 50-50. 50% like to report to the COO because I think it gives them more credibility, right? Mm-hmm. And it also helps them act more like Switzerland. So everybody reporting data, there's no playing with the data, right? And it also gives them just a more centralized and less biased place to create that customer journey. The other 50% like it being within the realm of sales because sales drives everything. It's, it's the engine, it's the lifeblood of an organization. So I see about 50-50.
Yeah, yeah. And in the book as well, there was another story or a quote from someone who mentioned that they organize their operations in 3 different ways. And the third one was that they actually had someone who was activating the marketing channels and the marketing automations, which might usually live in like a demand gen function, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so I bring that up to ask is, do you find that there is a challenge of course, there's this great benefit of bringing these functions together, having this center of excellence, but is there a risk of losing focus under sales or CS or marketing?
Of course, naturally. There always is, and again, there's not one best model. It's one best model for right now.
Right.
And I think that whatever kind of organization you put into place, it will change over time to be better responsive. And as I mentioned, quite frankly, to address talent vacuums that you might have in your organization. Yeah. And so yes. However, Laura, I will say this. These silos of marketing here, sales here, and customer success here, we're still talking about why we can't get together. I mean, at some point, you just have to call it. It's just crazy to be doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That's why we see Rev Ops becoming so critically important in the growth of an organization, because when they get rid of those silos, those walls, they're able to do what they have wanted to do for a very long time. The casual collaboration stuff, it's not working. in most cases, it's not working. And if I were a shareholder or the CEO or the board or heading the board of directors for a company like that, I'm looking to the CEO to optimize all of his or her resources to maximize shareholder value. And if this collaboration around that customer is not happening, then you're not doing your job.
Right. Right. And so one of the things that you mentioned, and this section is about like making the leap. And you talk about, of course, building your strategy around the customer and that customer funnel. And like first to build that or say that you're really customer centric is that show the evidence, right? Mm-hmm. And so seeing where the evidence is, and of course advocating for this change, but you need that strategy to make that change. And that change usually comes in the way of a new structure. And so, and that structure comes from like aligning from the tech stack, from that journey with the stage, building those milestones and the roles. And so I would love to hear, like, what are some common structures that you see, and like maybe what are the pros and cons of each? And of course, it depends on the organization, but I'm sure there are some commonalities.
Yeah, people love org structures. And one of the things when I wrote the book, I actually collected a whole bunch of org structures, but I just kind of ran out of book room, right? Yeah. So one of the most common structures I see is that you have a demand generation center that's in marketing, and the marketing ops role is responsible for being like the administrator and the experts on the system, right? So marketing ops is not involved in campaign strategy. There really are more about optimizing the systems and also the reporting and the data that comes along with that, right? And in that kind of structure, they're constantly looking at data and saying, okay, marketing, try these things to improve, or we see this data. And in that way, they're teaching marketing in the demand generation center to really, how do you interpret data? It's one thing to get data, another thing to what do you do with the data, right? And so I kind of see that. And then sometimes I see the demand generation center actually over in marketing operations, right? Okay. And that's where they will have campaign strategists. They will have all the strategy around campaigns, and they drive a lot of things that you would typically expect the demand generation center to do, right? So I think those are the two structures that I see the most. But I think in the majority of cases, that demand generation center is in marketing, and it is supported by the marketing ops organization. But I also see marketing ops taking on roles like creating a professional project management office. I see them taking on the job of working to create budgets with the CMO, and then keeping a track of and reconciling those budgets, right? I see them, and that's all the stuff that they do just kind of like within marketing. But again, marketing ops spends a lot of time, whatever function they're in, they spend a lot of time working with other parts of the organization. Yeah. Especially around data, and especially around systems, right? That integration of systems. So those are some basic structures that I see. But I tell people all the time, it's still the wild, wild west when it comes to an org structure. It just depends on where your company is and what they need, and a lot of times where the talent vacuums are.
Yeah. And say someone is making that leap, or they're in that revenue ops, next gen. And of course, again, it depends on company size, right? So how are you seeing the function being combined as a center of excellence for maybe a very small company where it's maybe one role versus a very large company where it could be an entire department, how they would manage this center of excellence?
Yeah, so whether it's a center of excellence or it's a new function, right? What we see RevOps being responsible for are the data and the systems and the processes that affect the customer journey, right? That's the best way I know to talk about that. And you have to think about above the line activities, things that you do that the customer sees, like your website, or, sales sending out follow-up emails, or customer success follow-up, things that the customer sees. And then there's all the processes endemic to the company that have to be knit together, right? So that everybody's on the same page with the customer, like no matter where they are. Now, I've seen one organization where one of their jobs was not to create content, but to kind of be the customer voice, to make sure that the content that was created and the messaging coming out from every part of the organization was coherent, right? And that it all fit together. So they were kind of like the messaging, central, right? To make sure that if marketing was doing this campaign thing over here, and it's just kind of getting everybody on the same page around what's going out about the company and how they're communicating with the customer. And that was a very effective role for them. And they actually created what they called a customer council, right? And so different parts of of these three organizations would come together on a monthly basis to talk about, what are we expressing to the customer? How are we reaching out to the customer? How are they taking that? And how can we be, more knit together to create an optimal experience for the customer?
Yeah. And that goes back to having that customer journey and the tech that aligns with it, what people are using it, and passing that message throughout.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And so we talked a little bit about what are the behaviors that, you're seeing many have, or where there's a gap. But as, again, this evolution and this revolution is happening, people are still falling into these roles, but we're seeing people start to strategically step into these roles, or they want to go in this path of operations. And so I'm curious on your perspective for how can someone get into operations if they want to get into this next gen? Is it starting in marketing operations? Is it starting in sales? Is it starting in specifically revenue?
Yeah, let's talk about careers and roles. That's a great topic. So one of the things that I do every year is I teach an MBA class at the College of William and Mary. I've been doing that for 11 years. And probably about 5 years ago, I started bringing in marketing ops professionals with me, because I always brought in other speakers, because I have like most of the day, and it's kind of like a seminar format. And so I began bringing in marketing ops professionals. And I think the very first person I brought in was Dan Brown, who was VP of Marketing Operations for Verint. And he did a great presentation. This is what marketing operations is. This is what my organization does. This is what we affect. These are the value that we bring. It was a great presentation. And he gets to the end of it, and one enterprising MBA student in the front row raises his hand and says, "Mr. Brown, that sounds like a fascinating career. How do we come to work for you?" And Dan looked out over the classroom and he said, "I wouldn't hire any of you." And you could have heard a pin drop. His point was, a marketing operations professional is truly a purple unicorn. They have to understand technology, data, process, analytics, marketing, strategy, business, right? And so it's very difficult to have all of those skills within a single organization. In one chapter of my book, I talk about how different companies have solved that problem. Some will take them right out of college, or a couple of years out of college, and they just put them on rotations, start in marketing and then do some simple stuff in marketing ops, to get your technology chops right. Some will take people from within their company. They may be coming from marketing, for people who have that acumen, or they may be taking somebody from IT who wants to get back into the business side of it, right? There's no easy answer. And as everybody listening to this podcast knows, there is a talent war going on right now for these professionals. And there's just not enough marketing operations or rev ops professionals out there. There just simply is not. I know of one training program to train marketing ops professionals, and that's run by my good friend Toby Murdoch at Highway Education.
Yeah, we had him on the show.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, like we were working with, we have a very large account in New York City that does these really nice credit card, you might know who that is. And they just hired two young ladies to go to work for them in marketing ops. And I told them, I said, do you know how lucky you are? Do you know how lucky you are to have this job with this company in this profession? You're going to be able to write your ticket for success, right? So it's hard to break into because it does take a lot of experience. And so sometimes I tell people, just go to work for the right company, a company that will give you the opportunity to learn and grow. And hopefully we'll have more programs out there, both in at the undergraduate level and also just business programs that will help you become and learn those skills that you need to learn. So it's a challenge for the individual who wants to begin a career there, and it's a big challenge for companies who are trying to hire in the space.
Yeah. And it sounds like there isn't really like a true entry level role specifically for operations, because I think what's happening if people are falling into the role is that they're in these positions, be it sales or marketing or even customer success, where they experience different parts of the entire funnel, and they either see ways to help optimize the experience for the customer, or they're ending up in situations where they're having a difficult time speaking to the customer, giving that optimal customer experience because their data is a mess, or their tools aren't supporting them, or they don't understand what's happening on the other end. And so they have these aha moments of, I'm experiencing this. How can I change it? Or how can I better serve someone else on the other end? So they're having these different experiences.
That's right. That's right.
Them into these
but having all the experiences is difficult. I think a path that we see most often is when somebody, like let's say, for example, your company buys Marketo, HubSpot, Eloqua, whatever, and you say to somebody, here, run this, right? And it's that person that really kind of becomes the marketing operations professional in many organizations. They learn so much by using that technology because it crosses so many parts of the business. And so that is the quickest path, is begin by getting your hands on a piece of that technology and learning how to use it. That is the quickest path into marketing operations.
Yeah. And so this might be a little repetitive in what you just answered, but I want to ask in case it brings in another perspective in that. So I'm hearing that it might be easier for someone to start with a tool and then build their way up to like being strategic. But what about the people who who are already thinking a little more high level, a little more strategic? Do they need to get back into the tools and learn that? Or is there still a path for that operational leadership for them?
That's a great question. And I'm a little split on the answer to that. And the only reason I say that is that if you're in marketing operations, you're damn good with technology, right? You can't just sit up here and be the strategic thinker. You got to know it, right? You got to know it. And you know it typically from doing some kind of hands-on work with some kind of technology somewhere. You just can't be technology savvy. You've got to be technology very competent, right? To be in marketing operations. So it's just a requirement. You just can't come in as a strategist. And because here's the other thing that happens, Laura, the technology changes so quickly. You have to keep up with what's new, and you have to understand how things get done with this technology, because technology is not a silver bullet all by itself, right? And so I think you have to have a deep technical expertise at every level to be successful in marketing operations.
Yeah, we had Andy Karen on the show a while back, and she's at Revenue Pulse. And one thing she mentioned is like she's at a VP level, but she takes time every now and then to get back into the tools because they're supporting these companies. And of course, it's good to have that strategic mindset, and you can't always be in the weeds, but to have an understanding of how these tools are working and functioning. And going throughout the systems and the funnel only benefits your strategy.
That's exactly right. You absolutely have to have that. I would agree.
Yeah. So Dr. Debbie, any final thoughts about the evolution of marketing ops and revenue ops and in building the talent in your career in that space?
Yeah, I would just say it is a very exciting area to be in. Can give you wonderful career opportunities. And if you have a passion for this area, follow that passion. It'll pay off because number one, you'll love what you do. Find a company that you can grow with and who will allow you to grow and learn. And it is one of the fastest growing areas within marketing and within the technology space today. And it is a fantastic career. Again, if you like to learn, if you like to change, if you like to lead, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, I love that. And there's so much to learn about this, and we've mentioned it a few times. Dr. Debbie literally wrote a book on it. It is From Backroom to Boardroom, and we'll make sure that we link it in the show notes, and we'll link the report.
Everybody gets a free copy. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so Dr. Debbie, where can people connect with you, learn more about you and the Pedowitz Group?
Sure. The best place is on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And if you want to email me directly, it's Debbie@pedowitzgroup.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know our audience and listeners are going to gain so much value.
Let me say this, Laura. You were a fantastic interviewer. I mean, oh my gosh, she clearly read the book, everybody. I'm telling you, she read the book. And your questions were fantastic. So thank you for hosting and thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Debbie. And one thing I forgot to mention is that, of course, very nervous to interview you, but admire you. I know when we first met, we connected on both being Southern women. And I think anybody, but especially women in the space, as we look for more leadership and leadership in marketing and marketing operations, you're a great person. So I'm honored and humbled by this interview and this conversation with you. So again, thank you so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to everyone who gets to listen to this conversation.
Thank you, Laura. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.